again. There we go. Okay, welcome back, folks. Political Economics, University of Pretoria, 2021. Let me share my screen and let's take a look at the second paper of this week. Let me share. So now, folks, we are going to see a paper which you are going to see. It's very much, it follows very much from this. Research is always follows from previous research, right? And now we are going to see a paper which came out in American Economic Review, 2016, by Stelius and Elias, and the title is "The Long-Run Effects," right? Again, the long-run effects, something that happened in the past and how that affects current outcomes. The long-run effects of the scramble for Africa, right? So let's take a look at the abstract and introduction. First sentence, research question of this paper. Well, the title is already pretty illustrative, right? It's the long run effect. So it's something that the scramble for Africa, it's important that you know what was the scramble for Africa back in the 19th century, and how something that happened in the 19th century, which is essentially how the borders were decided by the colonial powers at the time, how that scramble affects some outcomes now. Okay, so what do they do? Research question, ethnic partitioning, that is a new concept. They explore the consequences of ethnic partitioning, right? Which they say is a neglected aspect of this scramble for Africa, and uncover the following, right? So, results. The incidence, severity, and duration of political violence are all higher. So it's very much about political violence, the scramble for Africa, the boundaries, the ethnic boundaries, the current boundaries, and how that mismatch affects political violence or violence or conflict in general. And duration of political violence are all higher for partitioned homelands, which also experience frequent military interventions from neighboring countries. Okay, so it's very much about, folks, the ethnic boundaries that existed in Africa from pre-colonial times, and how the current borders, which didn't really take much of the ethnic boundaries into consideration, how that mismatch, right? Some ethnicities were essentially, during the scramble, some ethnicities were essentially cut in half, or sometimes in three, right? And how that mismatch affects conflict nowadays. So what else they find? Split groups. So some groups were split, are often entangled in a vicious circle of government-led discrimination and ethnic wars. Fourth, respondents from survey data identifying with split ethnicities are economically disadvantaged. So those ethnicities which were cut in half, or sometimes in three parts. We're going to see later on, they get less, for instance, in terms of provision of public goods, such as health and education. So a little bit of background, the scramble, as I said, you don't need me to tell you your history, but anyway, I'm just regurgitating here the paper. During the scramble for Africa, that starts with the Berlin Conference, 1884 and 1885, and is completed by the turn of the 20th century. Europeans partitioned Africa into spheres of influence, protectorates, and colonies, essentially the borders, right? The borders were designed in European capitals at a time when Europeans had barely settled in Africa and had limited knowledge of local conditions, especially of the ethnic boundaries. Despite their arbitrariness, boundaries outlived the colonial era, so the boundaries are still the same. As a result, the partition, important to understand what the partition was and its effect to groups which were essentially partitioned or split. As a result, in many African countries today, a significant fraction of the population belongs to ethnic groups that are partitioned among different states or different countries. Does it make sense, folks? Let's do the introduction, and then let's have a conversation about that, because I think in South Africa there are some groups which were also partitioned during colonial times. Addition to the literature and identification as well, despite the wealth of anecdotal evidence, there is little work formally examining the ramifications of ethnic partitioning in the context of the scramble for Africa. Some cross-country studies have touched upon this issue, showing that the likelihood of conflict increases when there is an ethnic war in adjacent states. And that countries with straight borders, think of Namibia, where a large share of the population belongs to ethnicities that are present in neighboring nations, right? Perform economically worse. Nevertheless, to the best of their knowledge, so they are saying what is that they add to this literature, there is no empirical work directly exploring the consequence of ethnic partitioning for African groups, which is their relevant unit of analysis, where the arbitrary border design, decided by the European colonial powers, and the large number of split groups. So always have the map with different, with the ethnic boundaries, right? And with the colonial boundaries, which are essentially the boundaries, the country boundaries that we have nowadays. Border design and the large number of split group offer the opportunity to cleanly identify the impact of partitioning. This study is a step in that direction. Results, what is that they find? They employ the scramble for Africa as a quasi-natural experiment. So it's completely exogenous, right, to Africans. Experiment to assess, although it's debatable, right? But anyway, let's assume it's exogenous. Experiment to assess the impact of ethnic partitioning on civil conflict. How these ethnic groups which were split or partitioned, how that can affect civil conflict. Always have in mind the example of Rwanda in 1994, right? And Rwanda, Burundi, and the DRC in 1994. So how do they do that? What is that they say about the data in the introduction? Using a newly assembled data set, which is the ACLED data set, that reports georeferenced information, right? It's much more at the micro level. Georeference information for 97 to 2013 period on incidents of political violence, right? It's not, they're not going to use folks country data, but they're going to use georeference micro data, which is very nice because you can actually pinpoint better, right? Information for the 97-2013 period on incidents of political violence, including battles between government forces, rebels, and militias, and violence against civilians. They document that civil conflict is higher in the homelands of partitioned ethnicities. So there is nothing better than using examples, right? And we're going to use again the example of Rwanda, Burundi, and the DRC. 94 is quite telling. In line with results on conflict, in line with the thesis put forward by African historians, that split groups are often used by neighboring countries to stage proxy wars and destabilize the government on the other side of the border. They find that military interventions from adjacent countries are more common in the homelands of partitioned groups rather than in nearby borders where non-split groups reside. So usually when there is intergovernment or interstate conflict in an area where there is a partitioned group, usually those areas are the areas which will suffer more from conflict. We don't know the channel yet, so they're going to give us the channel. Let's go on a step-by-step basis. The results, the channels, are in accord with African historiography, pointing out that partition groups, right, face discrimination. Even in South Africa, there, the border of South Africa, Botswana, and Zimbabwe, there is a partitioned group. Right? So it's nothing better than examples, than actual examples, right? The results are in accord with African historiography, pointing out that partition groups face discrimination from the national government And how do we know a particular group face discrimination? Well, because we have microdata and we can see whether a particular group gets more in terms of street lights than other group, or gets more in terms of education than other group. We can know, we know that now. We can get this sort of data now. Partitioned groups face discrimination from the national government and often engage in rebellions, often with the support of their co-ethnics on the other side of the border, right? To counter repression. More results and channels. Moreover, the likelihood that split ethnicities are subject to political discrimination from the national government is approximately 7 percentage points higher compared to non-split groups. So they are going to use survey data to get that sort of outcome. How do they do that? Members of partitioned groups, and more results, have fewer household assets, so they are poorer access to utilities, and worse educational outcomes as compared to individuals from non-split ethnicities in the same country and even in the same enumeration area. So they are going to see, so essentially, folks, again, what you need to have in mind here, apart from your knowledge of African history and etc., what you need to have in mind here is the ethnic boundaries map and the political map of Africa, and they do not always overlap, right? There are some groups which were partitioned during the scramble for Africa. Endogeneity concerns, folks. The main endogeneity concern is that the process of border drawing is usually an outcome of state formation that determines both economic performance and conflict. As the recent literature on state capacity shows, nation building, development, and conflict are interlinked and jointly determined by hard to account for factors related to the societal structure, geography, and historical legacies. Therefore, selection, reverse causality, and omitted variables are non-negligible issues which can result in endogeneity concerns. Likewise, due to measurement error in the main dependent variables, measurement error is always present. Multicollinearity and the limited degrees of freedom, the cross-country correlations are sensitive to small permutations and data revisions. So they are going to deal with those things as they move along in the paper. There we go again, a bit of history, historical background about the scramble. A bit of information there, right, folks? I think you can go there for yourselves. Channels and case studies, that's more important to what I can do to help you. There we go. There we go. That's the quality is not very good, right? Blues are partitioned groups. So on the left-hand side here, we have the boundaries of historical ethnicities before colonization and national boundaries, but it's very difficult to actually. The quality, when was this paper published? The quality now is much better. And the right-hand side map is much better, right? Because then you can see the ethnic boundaries and the actual political boundaries of African countries, right? And the blues, the blues all around, the blues are the partitioned groups, okay? And potentially, according to the channels that these guys, according to the research question that these guys are going to test, the blues are potential areas of conflict, right? Because these groups, they have been partitioned or split during the scramble. Okay, folks. I can see the blue there, right? Around Zim and Bots in South Africa. Artificiality, border artificiality, table 1, split. Here is not really what the results of the paper that we are interested in, but some potential determinants of borders, of how to create borders, artificial borders, right? Geography, the roles of geography, ecology, natural resource, and ethnic partitioning. We know, right, folks, that even the borders of South Africa were created by artificially at some point in history. And the borders didn't take into account the ethnic boundaries, not much, okay? But again, it's not something unique to Africa, right? Even the border between England and Scotland has changed many times in history, okay, due to conflict. Newcastle is part of England now, but it was part of Scotland in the past many times, so it keeps changing. And then essentially, folks, land, lake, rivers are usually the usual lakes and rivers are the usual things that divide elevation, suitability for agriculture, right? Malaria, distance to the coast, diamond mine indicator, right? That's an important thing for the drawing of South African borders, right? The mines and the location of the mines, and so on and so forth. But that's not exactly what I want to show you in this paper. Data, conflict data. So that's what the paper is about, right? They split groups, partitioned groups, and conflict. So the baseline data come from the armed conflict location and event data set, which is known as ACLED. That provides information on the location, and it's really micro information, right? And some other characteristics of political violence events across all African countries from 1997 to 2013, including South Africa, right? But you have to be very careful with this sort of data sets in terms of which variable, because they are going to provide with a bunch of variables there, right? Which account for violence. And so sometimes when you look at the data, you're going to see that South African data indicates that there is a lot of conflict in Cape Town. But then you have to be clear of what sort of conflict, what sort of information in terms of conflict the data is providing you. Okay. There we go. Figure 2, conflict. Type of violent events in ACLED. So again, I think the one that we should, it's the one on the right-hand side, and you see, we can see the African boundaries, and we don't see the actual ethnic boundaries, but there is a chart here. Let me see what's going on. Ethnic partition and fractionalization similar. Oh no, you guys are asking me complicated questions today, but it's good. It makes me think. Ethnic partition. No, it's not. Right? Fractionalization is fractionalization. Let me. Fractionalization is, I'm going up a little bit. Is that the first map? Yeah. Fractionalization is, those are the ethnic boundaries, right? The one on the left. Okay. And for instance, you see where I'm going around here. This is Nigeria. And Nigeria is a very fractionalized country, although the lingua franca is English, right? Because it was a British colony, parts of it. And ethnic fractionalization is, these guys are not talking about language, right? And ethnic fractionalization is based on the language that people speak at home, on the fractionalization, on the probability essentially of a bunch of, let's say, 20 students in South Africa speaking different home languages at home. That is how ethnic fractionalization is calculated, right? In this case, it's different. In this case, they split or partitioning is exactly like this on the right-hand side, right? We see the actual borders of African countries, right, which were designed end of 19th, beginning of 20th century, okay? The actual political borders. And then you can see, for instance, I think this is Libya or something. You can see that there is a group which was split. The blues are the split groups, right? Assuming, my geography is not very good, assuming that one is Libya, Libya is this one, and the other one is, I don't know, right? But you can see there is a split group there, right? That is the partition, okay? Nothing to do with language that they speak at home. Clear? I can
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. I don't know if I've been here. Okay, I've been here, right? Yeah. Okay, we were discussing this. And that's what students cannot say that I cannot say anything about, econometric specification and estimation. So what is that they do? That's the identification strategy, right? They are going to run some linear probability models and some regressions in general. So they estimate the long run effect of ethnic partitioning, not fractionalization, all right? But that was a good question. On contemporary, right? The ethnic partition happened in the past, and they are going to run regressions on contemporary civil conflict, all right? So they're going to use the variable, the dependent variable is a variable representing civil conflict against the variable split, okay? Split is a binary dummy variable that identifies partitioned ethnic areas in each country, right? So for example, the part of Lobby's homeland in Ivory Coast is assigned to Ivory Coast, while Lobby's landmass in Burkina Faso gets a Burkina Faso indicator, okay? So they're split. And maybe, according to the research question, according to the hypothesis they're going to test, maybe because in that area there is more conflict, right? Results, the coefficient on the ethnic partitioning index, the split variable, in the parsimonious specifications in columns 1 and 2, we're going to see the table in a few moments, is positive and more than 2 standard errors larger than 0. So essentially what they are saying is that the correlations between split, the variable split, and political conflict is positive, indicating that split groups in those areas, they are not saying that split groups go for more conflict, but that in those areas there is more conflict. Baseline, here is table 2, ethnic partition and civil conflict baseline country fixed effects estimates. That's the variable split, folks. Split correlates positively with conflict, right? That's what we want to do, or that's what we want to know at this point, at this stage, right? And they use a different estimator. They use a maximum likelihood estimator, and then they use an LPM, linear probability model estimator. Those of you doing microeconometrics with Steve, or who have done already, I'm sure he did that stuff with you. I don't know whether Steve is still teaching that stuff or it's Jesse. I don't know. What else we have there? Ethnic partitioning and civil conflict intensity, baseline country fixed effects estimates. Again, the split variable. And then in here, folks, each column is a regression, right? And then they use different categories of conflict. So deadly incidents, total casualties, duration, and it's again more results, different types of conflict as a sort of robustness test, and they get positive correlations again. What else they find that I found interesting? Let's see, what's this? Table 4, more results. Again, the variable split. against battles, civilian violence, riots and protests. And again, it's those areas with split ethnic group, they also see more of those types of conflict. Okay. What else? Let's see, what is this table about? Ethnic partitioning and conflict actors. Again, it's split against different, each column is a regression against different actors. So for instance, there is government forces, rebels and militias, nearby external and other external. And again, it's always positive in case more results are needed, split and conflict correlate positively. Let me see what else I highlighted. There's a lot of stuff in there, folks, but I'm showing you just the main results. Let's see what's going on here. More results: ethnic partition and political violence, discrimination and ethnic wars. Again, the variable split is there. And I highlighted here ethnic discrimination, right? And the split groups are more ethnically discriminated when they are minorities, right? What else I found interesting? I think there is also something about provision of public goods, individual well-being. I think we're getting there. Empirical specification reads. That's an identification strategy. They're going to use different dependent variables. Now reflects economic conditions and education of individual I that self-identifies with ethnic group E and resides in enumeration area R in country C. So it's a panel data, right? Let's see the results, and then we can make more sense. Yeah, there it is. Long-run effects of ethnic partitioning. Ethnic partitioning, again, always have in mind. Always have in mind the political map of Africa, as we understand today, and the ethnic boundaries map, right? The long-run effects of ethnic partitioning on individual well-being and education. I highlighted down there education. Again, these people, they get, actually I should have highlighted the estimates. They get less education when they are on the other side of the border where they are minorities, okay? Education is there. And conclusion, scramble partition, they study the consequences of a neglected aspect of the colonization in Africa, the drawing of political boundaries among European powers, which led to the partitioning of several ethnicities across African states upon independence, right? Independence came mostly in the 1960s, some in the 1970s, and I think Ghana in 1958. I think Ghana was the first one to become independent, but mostly in the 60s. And those boundaries didn't change, folks, before and after independence, right? And the ethnic boundaries didn't change either. And not all the time they had that perfect overlap, okay? Results, just a rehash of the introduction. They examined the effect of ethnic partitioning on civil conflict, as this has been conjectured to be its major consequence. They exploit a new data set, the ACLED data set, that reports precisely geo-coded information. So it's micro data for 64, let's say 65,000 conflict events of various types over the period 97-2013 for all African countries. And that includes South Africa, right? So again, if there is data for South Africa and you are interested in ethnic conflict in South Africa, especially in townships, right? It's an idea for you to pursue, which is that would make an important contribution with important policy implications, right? And they exploit within country across ethnic homeland variation. They uncover that political violence is prevalent in partitioned homelands, which experience deadly incidents over prolonged periods of violence. What else? They present evidence suggesting that neighboring countries use the homelands of partition groups to stage military interventions. Right? This suggests that ethnic partition is associated with a lower opportunity cost of fighting, as neighboring countries often offer military, political, and economic support to their co-ethnics just across the border. Okay. Always, again, it's important for you to know what is the homeland, in which side the homeland of a particular partitioned group is. Okay. What else they find? They're using microdata from the DHS, Demographic and Health Surveys, covering more than 85,000 people in 20 African countries. They South Africa is not very well represented in the DHS, unfortunately, right? They document that individuals identifying with partition groups have fewer household assets. So if there is a minority down here in South Africa, and the homeland of this minority is in Botswana or Zimbabwe. So these people, they will answer the survey. This minority, they say that they have fewer household assets, meaning that they have less property, or they are poorer. Poorer access to public utilities, and such as public goods provisions, such as street lights or piped water, and lower education. This pattern is not due to a generalized decline in standards of living of all households, but just of that particular group residing in split homelands. Rather, it is driven by the poorer economic circumstances of members of split ethnicities, irrespective of their actual residence. What else I found? Okay, then the reference is a bunch of people that we already Semoglos always comes first because it's alphabetical. It is alphabetical, right? No matter what they teach you at the University of Pretoria, it is alphabetical, always, okay? It doesn't matter whether you are a PhD student or a student, it's always in alphabetical order, right? Also, because it's easier, right, to find. Usually, if I've had papers with PhD students, and I happen to be B, right? So it's much easier to find that paper up here than nobody goes down there, right, folks? Nobody goes down there. Everybody stays. Nobody goes to W, right? Nobody goes to W, folks. Nobody sees papers in the W. Nobody scrolls all the way. Anyway, what do I know? Let me stop sharing. Questions, comments, suggestions about this paper?
Prof,
Go ahead.
if I were to write a referee report for this paper, I see the conclusion was a bit long. Will it be good to comment on the format of the paper, the structure? Like, for instance, here the conclusion, I think it was quite long than the normal ones.
It's fine. I am more interested, and I think you guys have to be more interested. The conclusion has a particular format. Okay, let me stop sharing. The conclusion has a particular format, right? You have to rehash the whole thing again. Okay. What is your research question? What is the data that you use? What is the method that you use to find to do your analysis, and what are the results? And then any policy implication. And also, usually people put in the intro and the conclusion some ideas for a new paper, okay? Because it's a good signal that you are sending that your research question is not a dead one, okay? There are other avenues that you can use, that you can pursue, and if the conclusion follows that format, no matter how long or how short, right? It's okay. We are more interested in the quality of the paper, right? And also, let's be honest. And those two guys, they are Greeks. English is not their first language. They are not great, right? They are not Shakespeare's, right? But they do good research, and that's what we are interested in, right? In good research, and that's what you guys have to be interested in as well. Good research. So these guys, if they write as well as Shakespeare, then they are in the wrong profession, right? Being an academic doesn't demand you to be Shakespeare. But I think again, if you write a report, if the conclusion follows the format, it's all about, in science, folks, it's all about following the format. It's about following a particular template of how to put a paper together. It's all about, if these people are following the format, which I think they are, right? Because this is an AER paper, then the job is done. Is that clear?
Yes, thank you.
Any other question, folks, or comment or suggestion? Is that more or less everything more or less clear? Okay, so if you need something, folks, always you are free to drop me an email. Let me stop recording this now. Let me stop record. So I'm stopped recording.